Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I deliver medical supplies for a local company. The job requires me to be on the road by 7 a.m. sharp because some of my deliveries are time-sensitive medications and mobility aids that people depend on to start their day. I've been living in my little house for about 3 years now. It's nothing fancy, just a small 2-bedroom place with a narrow driveway, but it's mine. When I first moved in, my neighbor seemed nice enough. Middle-aged guy who worked construction and kept to himself mostly. Everything was fine for the first couple of years. Then he bought the truck. This thing is absolutely massive. One of those lifted pickup trucks that's so big you need a ladder to get into it. The guy treats this truck like it's his firstborn child. Every weekend he's out there washing it, waxing it, checking the tires, adjusting something under the hood. He spends more time with that truck than he does with his actual family. The problem started about 6 months ago. Instead of parking the truck completely on his property, he started leaving it so it hung over into my driveway. Not completely blocking it, but enough that I couldn't get my car out without doing this ridiculous multi-point turn that took forever and scraped my bumper against my fence more than once. At first, I thought it was just an accident. Maybe he was in a hurry or didn't notice. So I walked over one evening and knocked on his door. I politely explained that his truck was hanging over into my driveway and asked if he could park it a little further over. He apologized and said there wasn't enough room on his side because of the property line. He promised to move it later, but said he'd try to figure something out. But he never did figure anything out. Days turned into weeks, and that truck kept hanging over into my space. I started having to leave for work 15 minutes earlier just to deal with the parking situation. I tried talking to him again a few weeks later. I brought up the truck situation again and explained that I was still having trouble getting out of my driveway. He got defensive and said he'd already told me he'd handle it. When I mentioned that it took me 10 minutes of backing up and pulling forward to get out without hitting anything, he suggested that maybe I should consider getting a smaller car instead. That's when I realized this guy wasn't going to help me out. But I kept trying to be reasonable about it. I even offered to help him measure the space to prove there was room on his side. He refused and said he didn't need to measure anything because he knew his own property. He also pointed out that he wasn't completely blocking me, as if that made it okay. The final straw came last Tuesday. I was running late because my alarm didn't go off, and I had a delivery of insulin that absolutely had to be there by 8 a.m. for a diabetic patient. I rushed out to my car and spent 12 minutes doing my usual parking lot dance just to get out of my own driveway. I ended up being 20 minutes late for the delivery, and my supervisor pulled me aside for a serious conversation about punctuality. My supervisor told me this was the 3rd time that month I've been late for morning deliveries. She said they couldn't have unreliable drivers handling medical supplies and that this was my only warning. I explained the situation with my neighbor, but it didn't matter. My job was on the line because of this guy's selfishness. That weekend, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee when I noticed him starting his weekly truck washing ritual. He had his bucket, his special soap, his collection of microfiber cloths. He was taking his sweet time, clearly enjoying every minute of pampering his precious vehicle. That's when I remembered the sprinkler system I'd installed last month. I'd gotten it primarily to keep my small garden watered, but I'd splurged on the fancy programmable timers because they were on sale. The sprinklers were positioned perfectly to cover my front yard, and if I aimed them just right, I grabbed the remote control for the timer system and watched as he started soaping up the truck. He was really going at it, covering every inch with thick, sudsy foam. The truck was absolutely covered in soap from bumper to bumper. That's when I hit the button. The sprinklers kicked on with full force, sending streams of water directly onto his truck. The water pressure was pretty strong since I'd upgraded the system, so it wasn't just a gentle mist. We're talking serious water coverage. He looked around confused for a second, then realized what was happening. The sprinklers were washing all his soap off faster than he could rinse it, but they were also soaking him completely. His nice weekend clothes were drenched within seconds. He yelled at me to turn the damn things off. I called back that I was sorry, but they were on a timer for automatic watering. I mentioned that I wasn't really dressed to go outside and mess with the timer box, since I was still in my pajamas and slippers. He tried covering parts of the truck with his body to block the water, but that just meant he was getting even more soaked. After about 10 minutes of this, he finally gave up and moved the truck to his own side of the property line. The sprinklers stopped hitting the truck immediately, since they were only positioned to water my yard. He accused me of doing it on purpose, standing there dripping wet and looking furious. I explained that my sprinklers run on a schedule and suggested that maybe he should park his truck somewhere that doesn't get wet during my watering time. What could he say? The sprinklers were clearly on my property, watering my yard. It wasn't my fault his truck happened to be in the spray zone. Since then, he's parked the truck properly on his own side every single time. I can get out of my driveway in under 30 seconds now, and I haven't been late for work once. My supervisor even complimented me on my improved punctuality. The guy still glares at me whenever he sees me, but he hasn't said a word about the parking situation. Every Saturday when he washes his truck, he makes sure it's parked well within his own property lines first. Those programmable sprinkler timers cost me $50, but they turned out to be the best investment I ever made. I'm a 21-year-old tour guide from Bulgaria, and I specialize in taking groups to Sicily. It's actually a pretty great job most of the time. I get to travel, meet people from all over, and share one of the most beautiful places in the Mediterranean with tourists who are genuinely excited to be there. I got into this work through my university's tourism program. After studying Italian and hospitality management, I landed an internship with a travel agency that does organized tours throughout southern Italy. Sicily became my specialty because I fell in love with the island during my first training trip there. The history, the food, the people, everything about it fascinated me. When the agency offered me a permanent position leading Bulgarian tour groups to Sicily, I jumped at the chance. The work isn't always easy though. You're basically responsible for 15 to 20 people for an entire week, making sure everyone stays safe, happy, and on schedule. You have to be part teacher, part entertainer, and sometimes part babysitter. But I genuinely love showing people around and seeing their faces when they taste real Sicilian cannoli for the first time or watch the sunset from Taormina. This particular trip started like any other. I had a group of 18 people, mostly couples and a few friends, traveling together. Everyone seemed nice enough during our first meeting at the hotel. I went through my usual spiel about departure times, emergency contacts, and general tour expectations. I always make sure to emphasize punctuality because we have a packed schedule and can't afford to waste time waiting around. The group included this one woman traveling alone, probably in her mid-30s. She seemed friendly enough initially, asked a few questions about the itinerary, nothing out of the ordinary. I handed out the printed schedules like I always do. They have all the departure times clearly marked, plus my phone number in case anyone needs to reach me. Our first real day trip was to Mount Etna and Taormina. It's one of my favorite excursions because you get to see an active volcano and one of Sicily's most beautiful towns, all in one day. We always leave at 8 o'clock in the morning sharp because it's a long day and we need to make the most of it. That morning everyone was gathered in the lobby by 7:55 except for her. 8 o'clock came and went. I checked my phone. No missed calls or messages. By 8:10 I was getting annoyed, but I figured maybe she had a legitimate reason for being late. At 8:15 she finally showed up, looking completely unbothered by the fact that 17 other people had been waiting for her. I greeted her good morning and pointed out that we were supposed to leave 15 minutes ago. She apologized casually and said she overslept because her phone died during the night. I decided to be understanding since it was the first day and these things happen. But I also needed to set expectations for the rest of the group. I spoke into the microphone on the bus and reminded everyone that departure times were firm. I explained that I could wait a maximum of 15 minutes in case of genuine emergencies, but only if they called to let me know they were running late. I asked everyone to make sure they were ready on time the next day. The trip went fine after that. Everyone enjoyed Etna, and Taormina was spectacular as always. I figured maybe the late start was just a one-time thing. The next morning the same thing happened, except worse. 8 o'clock came and went again. This time I called her at 8:05 and told her we were waiting for her in the lobby. No answer. I called again at 8:10, still nothing. By 8:20 I was seriously considering leaving without her when I saw her rushing through the lobby, hair still messy from sleep. She apologized quickly and said she couldn't find her room key and had to get a new one from reception. The receptionist actually stopped me when she was getting on the bus to ask about some missing information on our rooming list, which bought her a few extra minutes. But I was not happy. I spoke into the microphone again and told everyone this was the last time I was going to say this. I explained that I would not wait for anyone who was late the next morning because it wasn't fair to the rest of the group and we had a schedule to keep. I asked everyone to set multiple alarms and be ready on time. That evening, she approached me in the hotel lobby. I was going over the next day's itinerary and confirming our Syracuse trip details. She asked if I could maybe make sure to wake her up on time tomorrow. I looked up from my papers, thinking I must have misheard her. I asked her to repeat what she said. She told me to just knock on her door if she wasn't down by 8:15 just to make sure she was awake. I explained that I couldn't do that because I wasn't responsible for waking people up. I reminded her that she had the printed schedule with all the times, and I announced everything the evening before. I told her she needed to set an alarm. She kept insisting it wasn't a big deal and that I should just knock on her door if she wasn't out by 8:15. I repeated that I really couldn't do that for everyone and asked her to please just set an alarm on her phone. She then said that I was the guide and it was my job to make sure everyone was there. I explained that my job was to guide the tour once everyone showed up on time and that each person was responsible for getting themselves ready in the morning. She kept pushing, but I held firm. There was no way I was going to start playing alarm clock for grown adults. Can you imagine? If I had to knock on 18 different doors every morning, I'd never get anything done. The next day was our Syracuse trip, probably the most important excursion of the entire week. Syracuse is this incredible ancient city with Greek ruins and Baroque architecture. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site and absolutely unmissable if you're visiting Sicily. 8 o'clock came. No sign of her. 8:05, 8:10, 8:15. I called her twice. Straight to voicemail both times. At 8:15 exactly, I made the decision. I told the group that we needed to leave now because we had a full day ahead of us and couldn't afford to lose any more time. The bus pulled away from the hotel right on schedule. I felt a little bad, but honestly, I'd given her multiple warnings and she'd ignored all of them. The rest of the group seemed relieved that we weren't going to be sitting around waiting again. About an hour into our journey, my phone rang. It was her. She asked where we were and said she was down in the lobby, but there was no one there. I explained that we left at 8:15, that I had called her twice and waited the full 15 minutes I promised, and that we were on our way to Syracuse now. She asked what I meant and said I couldn't just leave her behind. She called the whole situation ridiculous. I reminded her that I had explained the policy multiple times and that everyone else managed to be on time. She said it was unacceptable and that she had paid for this trip. She accused me of having one job, which was to make sure she got to go on these excursions. I told her that my job was to guide people who showed up on time. I suggested she could enjoy the hotel that day or take a taxi to Syracuse if she wanted to meet us there. I offered to text her our itinerary. She yelled that I had cheated her out of her money and that this was the worst service she'd ever experienced. Then she hung up on me. The rest of the day was actually much more pleasant without the constant worry about whether she'd be late again. The group seemed more relaxed too, and we made great time getting to all our scheduled stops. When we got back to the hotel that evening, she was waiting in the lobby, looking furious. She immediately started telling the other tourists her version of events. She asked them if they could believe that their guide had abandoned her that morning. She claimed she was only a few minutes late and that I just left her behind. She said she'd never been treated so poorly on a vacation. One of the other tourists, an older gentleman who'd been on time every single day, spoke up and asked if she wasn't late every other day too. He reminded her that I had warned everyone about the departure times. She insisted that wasn't the point and that I should have made sure she was awake. Another tourist chimed in and pointed out that we all got the same schedule and everyone else managed to be ready on time. But she wasn't having any of it. She spent the rest of the evening complaining to anyone who would listen about how unprofessional I was and how the agency should fire me. The next morning, I got a call from my supervisor back in Bulgaria. She said they had received a complaint about me abandoning a client in Sicily and asked what happened. I explained the entire situation, including the multiple warnings and the clear policy I'd established. My supervisor was actually supportive. She said I did the right thing and that they couldn't have guides playing babysitter to adults who couldn't manage basic time management. She asked if I had documented the incidents. I had, fortunately. I always keep notes about any issues that arise during tours, and I'd recorded each time she was late and each warning I'd given. On our last day, the woman approached me one final time and told me she hoped I knew she had left reviews everywhere about this trip. She said she'd posted on the agency's website, online travel sites, everywhere. She wanted other people to know how I treated customers. I told her that was her right, but I hoped she also mentioned that she was late 3 days in a row, despite multiple warnings and a clearly stated policy. She insisted she shouldn't have needed warnings and that I should have been doing my job. I explained that my job was to provide an excellent experience for all my clients, not to be a personal assistant to one person who couldn't set an alarm. Her reviews didn't carry much weight. My agency investigated and found that my documentation was thorough and my actions were completely justified. They even updated their policies to make the departure time rules even clearer for future tours. I teach martial arts and have been doing it for 15 years now. Started when I was just 22, fresh out of college with a degree I never used. My dad owned the dojo and I grew up practically living there. When he passed away 3 years ago, I took over the business. It's been challenging, but I love what I do, teaching kids discipline, helping adults build confidence, and occasionally using my skills when life throws you a curveball. That's exactly what happened last Tuesday afternoon. I was walking back to my dojo after grabbing lunch from the sandwich shop down the street. It was a normal day, nothing special. The sun was out, people were going about their business, and I was thinking about the evening classes I had to teach. Then I heard shouting coming from the parking lot to the grocery store across the street. At first, I thought it might just be someone having a bad day. You know how it is, people get frustrated, they raise their voices, but when I got closer, I could see this wasn't just someone having a bad day. This was something much worse. There was a police officer on the ground, and this woman was standing over him screaming her head off. She was probably in her 40s, blonde hair pulled back. The officer looked like he was in serious pain, clutching his left leg. Karen was yelling that he couldn't arrest her and that she hadn't done anything wrong. The officer told her to step back and calm down right away. She screamed back that she wouldn't calm down and accused him of harassment. She threatened to sue him and the whole police department. People started gathering around, but everyone was keeping their distance. The officer was trying to get back on his feet, but something was clearly wrong with his leg. Later, I found out he'd lost his foot in a military deployment overseas and wore a prosthetic. Apparently, it had come loose during the struggle to arrest this woman. Karen called him pathetic and mocked him for crawling around on the ground like that. That's when she did something that made my blood run cold. She pulled her leg back and kicked the officer right in the head while he was trying to stand up. The sound was awful. He went down hard, his head hitting the pavement, but she wasn't done. While the officer was dazed on the ground, she went for his weapon. I watched in horror when she reached for his holster, trying to pull out his gun. That's when my training kicked in. I didn't even think about it. I just moved. I sprinted across the street faster than I'd ever run in my life. Cars honked at me when I dodged traffic, but I didn't care. This woman was about to get hold of a loaded weapon while standing over an injured police officer. I yelled at her to stop right there. Karen spun around when she heard me yelling, but her hand was still on the officer's gun. She managed to get it halfway out of the holster. She told me to stay back and said this didn't concern me. I demanded that she let go of the weapon right now. She refused and claimed that the officer had attacked her and she was just defending herself. I could see in her eyes that she'd completely lost it. Whatever had led to this situation, she was way past the point of reason. The officer was conscious but clearly struggling. Blood was trickling down from where she'd kicked him. When she tried to fully draw the weapon, I moved in. Years of training had taught me how to disarm someone safely, and I used every bit of that knowledge. I grabbed her wrist with both hands, twisted it away from the gun, and applied pressure to the specific points that would make her release her grip. Karen screamed that I was hurting her. I told her to drop the weapon and I'd let go. The gun clattered to the ground, but even then she wasn't done fighting. She tried to break free from my grip, swinging her other arm at my face. I ducked and smoothly transitioned into a restrained hold, getting her arms behind her back. She yelled that this was assault and that she was being assaulted. I explained to her that she had just kicked a police officer in the head and tried to steal his gun, so I was making a citizen's arrest. The officer thanked me and said he had backup coming. The officer was sitting up now, looking shaky but alert. He radioed for backup and an ambulance. I kept the woman restrained until help arrived, which felt like forever but was probably only about 5 minutes. Karen kept ranting that we were all working together and this was some kind of conspiracy. I told her she needed to stop talking and think about what she'd done. She insisted she hadn't done anything and that the officer had attacked her for no reason. Several people in the crowd started speaking up, telling me and the officer that they'd witnessed the whole thing. Apparently, the woman had been caught shoplifting from the grocery store. When the officer tried to arrest her, she'd resisted and somehow his prosthetic had come loose during the struggle. Instead of letting him recover, she'd decided to attack him. When backup arrived, they took over restraining the woman while paramedics checked on the injured officer. His head was going to be fine, just a small cut and probably a concussion. His prosthetic had been damaged though, and he'd need to get it repaired. Karen demanded to press charges against me, claiming I had assaulted her. The first backup officer explained to her that they had multiple witnesses who saw her kick an officer in the head and attempt to take his weapon. He told her she was going to be charged with assault on a police officer, attempted theft of a firearm, and resisting arrest. She said the whole thing was ridiculous and demanded a lawyer. The second backup officer told her she'd get her phone call at the station. When they loaded her into the patrol car, she was still screaming about how unfair everything was and how she was going to sue everyone involved. I gave my statement to one of the officers and handed over my contact information in case they needed me to testify later. The injured officer came over to thank me before the ambulance took him to get checked out. He said he couldn't thank me enough and that if I hadn't stepped in when I did, things could have been much worse. I asked how his leg was doing. He told me he'd be okay and that this wasn't his first problem with the prosthetic, but she'd really caught him off guard when it came loose. I replied that she wouldn't be catching anyone off guard for a while. When I watched the patrol car drive away with Karen still yelling from the back seat, I thought about how quickly things had escalated. 1 minute I was walking back from lunch, the next I was restraining someone who'd just assaulted a police officer. The whole thing ended up on the local news that evening. It turns out Karen had quite a history of similar incidents around town. The prosecutor decided to throw the book at her, and she ended up pleading guilty to multiple felony charges. Last I heard, she got 3 years in prison and mandatory anger management classes. The officer recovered completely and actually stopped by my dojo a few weeks later to thank me again. When I turned 19, I was desperate for work. I just moved out of my parents' place and was sharing a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. The rent was killing me, and I needed something that paid decent tips. That's how I ended up at this waterfront bar downtown. The location was prime real estate right on the harbor with a view that tourists paid good money for. But what I didn't know when I applied was that this place had a reputation. The bar sat right next to the offices of one of those big accounting firms. Every day after work, these finance guys in their expensive suits would flood our place like they owned it. They had money to burn and attitudes to match. The management loved them because they dropped serious cash on overpriced cocktails and bottle service. For the first few weeks, I thought maybe I could handle it. The pay wasn't terrible, and the tips were pretty good when customers weren't being complete jerks. But then I started noticing things. The way these business guys would accidentally brush against the female staff. How they'd block our path when we were carrying heavy trays just to force us to squeeze past them. The comments they'd make about our bodies like we couldn't hear them. Trying to navigate the dance floor during busy nights was a nightmare. Picture this. You're carrying a tray loaded with drinks worth more than your daily wage, trying to weave through a crowd of drunk men in suits who think grabbing your waist or grinding against you is just harmless fun. I lost count of how many times I nearly dropped everything because some entitled creep decided my body was his personal playground. When we complained to management, we got the same response every time. They would tell us that these guys spent a lot of money at the bar and we should just laugh it off and keep them happy. When I pointed out that they were literally groping us while we were trying to work, management would shrug and say that boys will be boys. They reminded us that we knew what kind of environment this was when we took the job. That should have been my cue to quit, but I was stubborn. I needed the money, and some part of me refused to let these jerks win by driving me away. Then came the announcement that changed everything. Management called all the female staff into the back office one afternoon and told us they were implementing a new dress code for special events and functions. All female wait staff would be required to wear black cocktail dresses and heels. My co-worker immediately spoke up and asked if they were serious about the heels. She pointed out how dangerous that would be with the wet floors and stairs. The manager responded that it was about maintaining a certain image for their clientele. I asked if he meant making us look like decoration for those finance bros. The manager said he didn't appreciate my attitude and claimed this was about professionalism. We pushed back hard on the heels requirement. A few of us even mentioned that it was a workplace safety issue waiting to happen. After some back and forth, management grudgingly agreed to drop the heels, but they were firm on the cocktail dresses. The manager made it clear that the dresses were non-negotiable. He explained that our neighbors from the accounting firm had specifically requested a more upscale atmosphere for their events. Of course they did. These were the same guys who thought our bodies were part of the entertainment package. I went home that night furious. I complained to my roommates about the whole situation. One of them asked why I didn't just quit since the place sounded toxic. I explained that I couldn't afford to quit without having something else lined up, and I wasn't letting them push me out. That's when the idea hit me. If management wanted to turn us into eye candy for these entitled jerks, I'd give them something to look at. I decided it was time to stop shaving my armpits and let my natural body hair grow out. The next function night, I showed up in the required black cocktail dress, a strapless number that I'd bought from a thrift store. But underneath my arms, I was sporting a good 2 weeks' worth of armpit hair growth. I felt nervous but also strangely empowered. The reaction was immediate. I could see the accounting firm guys doing double takes when I raised my arms to serve drinks. Some of them looked genuinely horrified, like they'd never seen a woman with natural body hair before. A few made disgusted faces and whispered to their colleagues. I overheard one finance guy tell another that what I was doing was disgusting. His friend agreed and said someone should tell management that it wasn't professional. I just smiled sweetly and continued doing my job. What were they going to say, that a woman having natural body hair was somehow offensive to them? But management definitely noticed. I could see them whispering and shooting looks my way throughout the night. The next function, something interesting happened. The manager approached me and said they needed me to help prep in the kitchen that night instead of serving. When I asked why, since I was scheduled for floor service, he just said they had enough servers and asked if I could cut lemons and help with drink prep. I knew exactly what this was about, but I played innocent and told him sure, no problem. So there I was, relegated to the back kitchen, wearing my cocktail dress while cutting fruit for garnishes. The kitchen staff thought the whole situation was hilarious. One of the cooks asked if they were really making me hide back here because of my armpit hair. I confirmed that apparently natural body hair didn't fit their upscale image. He said it was ridiculous and that These finance guys acted like they'd never seen a real woman before. The beautiful irony was that I loved these shifts. Instead of dealing with grabby customers and entitled jerks making crude comments, I got to hang out with a kitchen crew who treated me like a human being. We'd joke around, listen to music, and I could do my job without constantly looking over my shoulder. Every function night became the same routine. I show up in my cocktail dress with my armpit hair proudly on display, and management would immediately send me to the back. They never had the guts to directly tell me to shave, probably because they knew they couldn't legally require that. So instead, they just kept me hidden away like some kind of secret. The kitchen manager pointed out one day that I basically gamed the system. I was getting paid the same but didn't have to deal with those awful customers. I admitted I hadn't thought of it that way, but he was right. The whole thing reached peak absurdity when one of the accounting firm partners complained to our manager about me. The manager told me that one of their valued customers had mentioned that my appearance was inappropriate for their corporate event. I asked what about my appearance he was referring to since I was wearing the cocktail dress they required. He said I knew what he was talking about. I told him I didn't and asked if he could be more specific about what part of my appearance violated our dress code. The manager just stood there for a moment, clearly realizing he couldn't say it out loud without sounding ridiculous. He finally just told me to try to maintain better grooming standards. I responded that I showered daily and maintained good hygiene, then asked if there was something specific he'd like me to change. He walked away without answering, probably because he knew he'd stepped into legal territory he didn't want to navigate. A few months later, I overheard two of the finance guys talking at the bar. One asked the other if he remembered that weird waitress with the armpit hair. The second guy said he did and wondered what had happened to her since he hadn't seen her in forever. The first one suggested she probably got fired for being unprofessional. I was literally standing 10 feet away from them, cutting lemons in my cocktail dress, having the time of my life with my kitchen crew friends. They had no idea I was still there, still getting paid, still refusing to conform to their ridiculous standards. Management had created the perfect job for me by trying to punish me. I kept that job for another 6 months before finally finding something better. For 10 years, I've been working from home as an automation engineer for a small company that built custom industrial gas treatment systems. My job was pretty specialized. I wrote the computer programs that told the machines what to do, designed the user interfaces, and set up data connections for customers. Think of me as a person who taught robots how to think. The pay wasn't great compared to what I could make elsewhere, but honestly, I wasn't complaining. With only 4 or 5 projects per year, and each one taking me just 2 to 3 weeks to complete, I was basically getting paid to do nothing most of the time. Plus, I had some good passive income from smart investments I'd made with money I inherited, so I was comfortable. Life was good until the company owner decided to retire and sold the business. That's when everything changed. New management came in with their bright ideas about improving efficiency and maximizing productivity. In my country, every worker gets at least 4 weeks of paid vacation per year. If you don't use it, it rolls over to the next year. But you have to take at least 2 uninterrupted weeks annually. Since I had so much free time anyway, I usually only took the mandatory 2 weeks, which meant I was accumulating 14 extra vacation days every year. I've been doing this for years, always making sure no important work was scheduled during my time off. One of the first things the new management did was implement scheduled vacations. Instead of taking time off when it made sense, we now had to decide at the beginning of the year when we'd take our mandatory 2 weeks. I picked the first 2 weeks of April. In early March, my phone rang. It was the development team manager. He asked me to go on a quick 3-day business trip to help a maintenance engineer switch out some equipment and upload a new project. He explained that they were short-staffed because a bunch of people had quit after the new maintenance manager started. I figured it would be easy work. We'd done an identical job the month before, so I'd just fly out, relax until the electrical work was done, upload the project, and fly home. I told him I could do it since it sounded straightforward. When I got there, I discovered the maintenance engineer they sent wasn't just bad with computers, He knew absolutely nothing about electrical work either. So there I was, doing everything myself, which I wasn't even qualified to do. But the client turned out to be really nice people, and I didn't want to let them down. After a full week and burning through 3 fuses, I finally got everything working. When I got back, I called my manager immediately. I told him I wasn't going on any more business trips because I didn't get paid enough to also do the maintenance engineer's job. He said he understood and thanked me for getting it done. April 1st rolled around, the start of my vacation. I was looking forward to 2 weeks of actual rest. Then my phone rang again. Against my better judgment, I answered. The manager told me they needed me to go on another business trip starting the following Monday. He said it would just take a week and was for the industrial cooling project. I told him I wasn't familiar with that project since it was done while I was on paternity leave. In my country, either parent can take up to 3 years of parental leave, and after the first 6 months, my wife had asked me to take over so she could go back to work. He explained that they'd had to hire an outside specialist to do that project while I was gone. He said he'd send me everything right away, and then hung up before I could respond. A few minutes later, my email chimed with the project files. I opened them and my jaw dropped. This wasn't a simple week-long job, it was a nightmare. 7 different programmable controllers, 6 user interface panels, all supposed to work as one system. And the code was a complete mess. Nothing would work as written. It would need to be rebuilt from scratch, which would take me close to a month working from my comfortable home office where I was most productive. I called back immediately. I told him I'd looked at the project, and it was a disaster. I explained there was no way to finish it in a week and that I'd do what I could, but like I'd said last time, I was doing it remotely. I made it clear I wouldn't go on another business trip, especially not when I had plans for the next few weeks. He argued that the internet reception on site was terrible and I wouldn't be able to access anything remotely. He went on about how they'd already missed all their deadlines on this project. The client was furious, and they were looking at huge penalty fees. He said the CEO was breathing down his neck, and they needed this fixed yesterday. I suggested that I could email the maintenance engineer the updated project files each evening when he was back at his hotel with decent reception. The engineer could then email me a list of what needed fixing. I reminded him it wasn't the first time we'd worked this way. He said he heard me but would have to speak with the CEO about it. 15 minutes later, my phone rang again. He told me the CEO had said that if I didn't want to go, I should just write a resignation letter. I had to laugh. Here I was, the only employee in the company who knew how to do my specific job, and they were threatening to fire me over this. I told him sure I'd send my resignation letter right away. I thought about just refusing and making them terminate me so I'd get termination compensation. But then I decided to be petty in a more creative way. In my country, you have to give at least 2 weeks' notice unless both parties agree to something shorter. So I wrote my resignation letter and set my last day as April 14th, exactly 2 weeks from that day. The letter was approved within the hour. A little later, my phone rang again. The manager asked if I'd be able to finish the project before I left. I told him I wouldn't be able to do any work on that project before I left. He sounded confused and asked why. He pointed out that I still had 2 weeks and they really needed it done. I explained that I was on vacation right then. I told him the last day of my vacation would be April 13th and I was resigning on April 14th. The silence on the other end was beautiful. They'd completely forgotten that I was on my scheduled vacation. The vacation their new policy had forced me to schedule months in advance. He stammered that they needed the project done. I told him they should have thought of that before they tried to force me to work during my vacation and then threatened to fire me when I said no. I hung up and enjoyed the rest of my vacation in peace. A few months later, I got a message from a former colleague I'm still friends with. The company is in deep trouble. They missed all their deadlines, the penalty fees rolled in, and their bank accounts got frozen. They haven't been able to pay salaries for the last 2 months and are probably headed for bankruptcy. Don't worry about the employees though. In my country, salary debts have the highest priority when a bankrupt business sells its assets, so everyone will eventually get paid. The only downside for me is that I still haven't received compensation for my 120 accumulated vacation days. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.